Hey Skybrush community, this is B-Rad. That's what my kids call me. I also go by Brad, and it's a pleasure to have been meeting some of you on Discord. I wanted to offer a really basic tutorial on getting started in Blender just because it's such a steep learning curve. I've been running drone light shows now for a couple of years with my company Dynamic Skies. We're based out of Oklahoma in the United States. And last year I bit the bullet and learned how to design the shows myself out of a desire to express the creativity that we wanted to be providing to our audiences and to further the goal of the company, which is to make the shows as dynamic as possible. So it's been a super rewarding but frustrating experience. And I hope I can reduce some of the frustration for you just getting started with the basics in Blender. So with that in mind, let's head on over to Blender with the basic scene that gets started. I do have an add-on here so that in the top sort of middle of the screen you should be able to see that I'm pressing the left mouse button or the right mouse button, and that should help you follow along if you'd like to rewind, replay, and kind of see what I'm doing. But before we really even get started with too much, let's just get started with the basics of moving around in Blender. So in order to, let's say we want to rotate the view, we're going to hold down the middle mouse button and move the mouse around, and that will rotate up and down, left and right. In order to move around, we're going to hold the shift key while holding the middle mouse button, and then that will translate us left or right or up or down. And of course the middle mouse wheel will zoom in and out. It's important to understand which mode that you're currently in. So we're currently now in what's called the object mode. You can see that here in the upper left. To switch into the edit mode, which you're going to do a lot, you need to have an object selected. We now have the basic cube object selected, and hit tab, and that's then going to go into the edit mode. So just remember that you need to use the tab frequently to go back and forth between the object mode and the edit mode. Now let's say we want to change the view to something that's more straight on. So the the numpad 1 will rotate it so that I'm looking straight down the y-axis with the red x-axis left and right and the z-axis up and down. The numpad 7 key is now a top-down view, and then the numpad 3 is now looking down the x-axis and the y-axis left and right and the z-axis up. So the 1, 7, and 3 keys I use frequently a lot. It just turns out when you're moving objects around, which let's do that. Let's learn how to move an object around. I've got the object mode, I've got the cube selected. Just going to hit G, and by hitting G I can then move this object around. And one of the advantages of being in this locked mode, it's not really locked, but putting it in the mode that I'm in the view, it's not going to move it. I know it's not going to move it at all in the y-axis. It's just moving it in the x and the z axes. And so if I click the mouse button and leave it there, and then I go to a top-down view, and now if I select G and I move it around, now I'm only moving it in the x and y axes. So there's other ways to move too with the keyboard shortcuts. If I hit the G key and hit the say X key, now it's only going to move it in the X direction. So I can move the mouse up and down all day long, but it's only ever going to move in the X direction. And the same is true for the Y and for the Z. So that's sort of helpful to know. Let's see, what else? Oh, what if we want to rotate this object? So let's kind of look at the cube like this. That'll help us see the rotation. The shortcut to rotate an object is R. So I'm going to hit the R key, and I can rotate this cube all along. If I don't like what's going on, I can hit escape, and it goes right back to the basic view. So let's say I want to just rotate it in the Z direction. I can do R and Z, and now it's just going to rotate only in the Z direction. So those are kind of just some basic things with Blender to help you get started. So like with probably about any Blender project, the first thing we're going to do is actually delete the cube. So let's do that now, and the shortcut to do that is simply just X with the object selected. So I'm going to hit X and confirm the deletion, and boom, that's gone. Now you've got a couple of other objects that are by default in Blender. One of them is a light, and one of them is the camera. The camera we're actually going to use. The light we're actually going to delete. That doesn't really serve any purpose. The purpose that the camera is actually going to serve, and I'm actually just going to kind of rotate and look at this view here, is we can use that to actually view the show from the audience perspective. So we may show that later on in the tutorial. Okay, couple of things getting started with our scene. We've got the camera, and that's basically all that's in there. I'll show you which version that I'm using. Just if you want to confirm, I normally use about the latest version. So I'm currently running version 3.6.1. And the first thing I want to cover is how to enable the Skybrush add-on. So you're going to download the zip file. Do not unpack it. Just download the zip file. And you're going to go to Edit, Preferences. Of course, you'll remember where you downloaded it, probably to your Downloads folder. And then just wherever it is on your computer, probably in your downloads, go ahead and do that. Select the zip file and then just install add-on. And that's all you have to do. There's nothing more that you need to do for that. I think another common thing I've seen happen for people is they won't see that the add-on is installed. And typically that's because this right part of the 3D viewport is hidden. See how it's hidden there? You can either hit the arrows, carrots to get it out there, or the N is a shortcut to get that out. And as soon as you have the Skybrush add-on, you'll know it because you'll have formations, LEDs, and safety export will be enabled over there. And while I'm here, there's a few other add-ons I just want to point out to you that I find to be helpful. One is the extra objects add-ons, the add curve and the add mesh. I think I'll show you both of those in the tutorial. What I'm going to do, you'll see those. Another one is called loop tools. So the mesh loop tools, that is helpful for getting vertices spaced evenly. And then another one, which I don't think I'll probably have time in this tutorial, is called Animal, and that helps you to animate the individual vertices within an object. Okay, let's see. There's some other things that I'd like to do before we get started. One's going to be to go up to our viewpoint overlays and see what we have here. One that's going to be really helpful is going to be statistics. This will tell you how many objects and how many vertices are selected. So I definitely recommend going ahead and enabling the statistics. Another thing you can do now that you have the Skybrush added on is in your safety settings here, you can set your proximity warning for drones. So right now it's going to warn us if the drones get closer than 3 meters. I normally run mine at 2.4 as I'm designing my shows. You can use whatever you like. Velocity warnings, I usually run my horizontal X and Y at 3.5 and my verticals at 3.2. And then at any time if those get annoying, and sometimes they do kind of get in the way of what you're trying to do, you can actually turn off the safety checks at any time. So we'll definitely see those happening during the tutorial. Another thing I like to do is back in the preferences setting under system is to change this undo steps. I think the default is 30. I like to change this to like a ridiculously high amount just so that I've got a lot of undo options. It's free, and I would recommend doing that because there probably will be times when you'll want to undo that away. Let's see. Another thing is I'm normally on the viewport. I'm normally in, I don't know if you can see it, this selection right here, viewport shading. But in the viewport shading on the very far right, I like to change that so that it is a dark black color. That just helps it look really nice when you're doing your scene. So if you'll select the world properties over here on that scene, and then just bring the shade all the way down black. When we start to get some drones in here, this is a really good view to see how your show's maybe actually going to kind of look. By the way, in your viewport overlays, you can change the grid, or you can turn off the grid and the floor and the X and the Y axes. You can turn off the 3D cursor. You can turn off all of that if you're doing sort of a screen recording, maybe to show a customer what your show actually is going to look like. But let's go back to this other viewport shading, and this is a little bit easier to design a show in. And we'll get going by, how about we'll set the camera back just a little bit. So I'm going to hit G and Y Y, by the way, is going to be the direction of our show. You can use the X or you can use the Y. It's just up to your individual setup. Now I'm going to start with designing a show that's a little bit more than a basic just up and down show. It frequently happens where you want to take the drones off in a specific orientation, but then your orientation to your audience is a different orientation, and maybe you want to move it a little bit. So I'm going to show you right off the bat. It's going to be a while before we get started taking drones off, but I think this is really helpful to see this from the start. And if you want to implement that, I think it'll really help when you're trying to do shows with specific geometries. So the first step I'm going to take for granted that you can figure out how to do this is in Google Earth, get a straight top-down view of your show area, and then go ahead and draw a ruler tool that's whatever distance you want. I use 100 meters. It could be 50, it could be 60, whatever you want, just so you know how many meters it is. By the way, the reason I say meters is because each unit in Blender, I'll sometimes interchangeably call that meters, but it's really just one unit in Blender. But in my implementation, 1 unit equals 1 meter in the export. So that's why I use meters. And then I'm going to go ahead and add in that, go ahead and save off that reference image. You should also make that line to be the line from the audience to where the show is going to be. So that's helpful for getting things lined up, which you'll see. So draw on your ruler tool a fixed line of known distance in the direction from your audience to where your show is going to be. And I think that'll become really clear once we get our image inserted here. So this is going to be my image. I'm going to add it by doing a let's see, top-down view, a Shift A. So this Shift A you're going to use a lot. So let me do that one more time. Shift A brings up a ton of options from mesh to curve objects. This is basically how you add everything to your scene. And you'll see I've got an image option here. I'm just going to add it as a reference. You can do it as a background. I don't think that it really matters too much. And this is the map that I pre-saved off as a JPEG. I think I just used the snipping tool, which is fine because you've drawn a reference line in there to know. Now the next thing that you're going to do is rotate this so that your reference line, mine happens to be red here. I'm going to rotate this image R and then Z to rotate it purely around the Z axis, and I'm going to get my reference line looking pretty well as lined up as I can with my Y axis, since that's going to be the direction of my show. And then I'm going to scale this. Now you can hit S and move the mouse. That's going to scale it up and down. Just to save a little bit of time, I know what on this particular image what the scale factor is going to need to be, and I'm just going to go ahead and put that in now. But what you're going to have to do on each new one is you're going to have to scale this up and down so that it equals whatever distance you made it. Like I said, in this case, it's 100 meters. Now you can't see the grid beneath this, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the image over here on Properties. Oh, by the way, let's get some background music going, just so it's not so totally boring. So hopefully that'll help. Okay, so where were we at? We were going to change the transparency of the image so that we can actually see the grid lines behind it. So to do that, I've selected the image. Now in the properties here, I've got an image option, and I can select on opacity here, and I can bring the transparency of this thing way down. So now when I zoom in, if I look at this thing and I do it, if I counted that each one of these is now 10 meters, that's going to be about 100 meters. By the way, if you ever get lost, because this thing kind of zooms in and the grid lines sort of start to disappear as you get to different scales, all you have to do to find out where your scaling is at is take your object and then do G. I'll do Y because I'm just going to change it anyways, and I move it 10 meters. And so you can verify what you're scaling actually is probably a good idea before you get started too deep in design. Now where you're going to take off from is going to be the origin of the XY axis. At least I think it will be for your show. So what I'm going to then do now is I'm going to move this image. I just hit G, and I'm going to move it to the takeoff location. So this is an area where I've flown before, and this is basically how I did it. So we apply to the center here, this takeoff area. That happens to be the parking lot that we like. And by the way, we're going to do 30 drones today. So we're going to do actually a 3x10 formation right here. And I think I like that location. So what I want to do now is kind of lock this background image in so it doesn't move around too much. And I can do that by, we're not really locking it, but I'm going to go to the object properties here, and I'm going to go to visibility, and you can actually make it unselectable. So now I can't select the object accidentally here. I would have to go up here and select it, but even still, I can't move it until I make it selectable. So, by the way, it is helpful to change the name, so I'm going to change the name of this to map. So boom, there we go. In our collection, we've got the camera and the map, and now we're ready to add the drones. So formation, create takeoff grid. You've probably gotten this far. In fact, this is probably the first step you did. It certainly is the first one I did. I'm going to go ahead and leave in a spacing of 3 meters and see if I can fit that in my drone orientation of 30 here. And what it's going to do is it's actually going to create them in an orientation that's not really going to work for this location. So I actually need to rotate rotate this formation. So what I want to do is I want to select the drones, and I want to select the takeoff grid formations. So if I drag around it here, I should get 60 objects, 30 for the drones and 30 for the takeoff grids. And sure enough, that's what I've got. By the way, if I had not made the map unselectable, I would have gotten 61 objects because it would have selected the map, and we don't want to rotate the map now that we've got it. So we've got everything all nicely selected now. I'm going to hit R for rotate. I'm going to hit Z to rotate it around the Z axis, and then I'm just going to rotate my grid. And now we're neatly contained within the takeoff area. So sweet. Okay, what should we do next? Next, we should make a formation for these drones to go up in. By the way, the audience, if it's not obvious, for a baseball stadium is going to be right here. So that's why I drew the start of my red line, my reference line here, and the goal is to get my show actually out here over the outfield. We're not going to cover obstacle avoidance today, but definitely lights for a stadium. We definitely need to get up and over those lights. So just be cognizant of that in the vertical orientation of your show as well. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to add is just a super basic formation. We're going to make a circle. And let's go ahead and make that in an orientation that's visible to the audience. So in the orientation that they're facing. So I'm going to hit the 1 keypad. Now I'm looking straight down the y-axis, and I'm going to do Shift A to add a circle mesh. Okay. What I find really helpful is many times when you're adding objects, you'll get some additional options available in the lower left, but you don't really see what those are until you plus them out. And so we can now see that we've added a circle with 32 vertices with a radius of 1 meter. That's really super small, and a 0 location right at the origin and rotations. So I only have 30 drones, so I'm going to change the vertices to 30. And I can do kind of basic math. If I want to get 30-meter spacing 3 meter spacing for 30 drones, there's going to be 20 segments between them. I can just use 2 pi r to figure out that the spacing or the radius of that circle needs to be 14 meters. So I've made it bigger, but I still don't see the circle. Why? Well, because it laid it down on the XY plane. So I can actually rotate it around the x-axis right now, 90 degrees, and boom, our circle is now popped into view. We don't want to go below ground, so you can actually, in these locations here, you can drag the sliders left and right, up and down, or like as soon as you hit a mouse key, these options all go away. Now you have to revert to kind of just normal methods. So let's just make the circle take off to right above. Let's actually be careful and let's actually get it. Let's say that's the height that that our lights are at, so that when we're moving over, we're at least above the lights. And we're now ready to assign these drones for the first formation to the vertices. So this is the first time we're now going into the edit mode. And the way I did that, remember again, it's the tab key. So I can now see all these. The vertices may all not be selected. If they're not, then hit the A key or drag around and you should get 30 vertices selected. So once you've done that, this is now the Studio Skybrush add-on becomes extremely helpful. We go into the data tab and we add a vertex group and we assign that to those vertices. And then this is very important, down in the drone show you actually have to say use selected. So the vertex group down here, the vertex group name should actually match down here. And once you've done that, you can tab back. You have to tab back to object mode actually to add this formation. Let's actually, I was sloppy because I did not see where it added this vertex. So let's collapse the formations, let's collapse drones, and you can see that the circle got added under these collections. I like to manage the folders here a little bit better than that. So let's make another collection and call this, I normally just call it start. So it's a start of each formation. So I can add that collection and then I can just drag this circle down. And circle is a good enough name for me, we'll keep that. And we're now going to assign the selected objects. In this case, it's just one object. We know that because in statistics, we can see we just have one object selected. And we select OK, and now we append that to the storyboard. So now it's important to come down and start becoming familiar with the timeline. This timeline is only 250 frames long, which is not a whole lot of time. If we want to get any reasonable length out of the show, we've got to have that up in the few thousands range. So I'm just going to bump it up to 12,000. That fits 4 frames per second, just over 8 minutes. So anyways, it's way more than we need for this tutorial. But let's update the time markers. So that is there, and I don't see any time markers. Why? Well, because it took longer than 120 frames to get up there. So I've now scaled. By the way, I'm using the middle mouse wheel to scale while I've got the mouse over this timeline here. So we can see it's taking 675-ish frames to get up to that circle. And then the default length of the circle is 480. That's kind of, we know it's going to actually take a long time to move this circle over to the show area. So let's just change this to 1,000 right now. And it's not going to update the time marker automatically. We've got to click on update time markers. And so now you can see this formation is there for a nice period of time for us to get it moved over. Before we do that, let's make sure that the drones actually get transition there. So you can select on the transitions to recalculate for the entire storyboard or just to the selected formation. I'm just going to do entire storyboard since that's just this so far. And we've got these relationship lines that appear the first time you do that. I'm going to go up to the 3D viewport overlays and just turn off these relationship lines. They're not important to really look at. But you can see when we hit play here, the drones should actually start flying up to the circle. They are. We can monitor on the statistics here the maximum velocity. So they're coming up at 2.9, 3 meters per second. And we can see the minimum distance between the drones is 2.1 meters right now, 2.2, and 3. So you'll find, thanks to the Skybrush folks that have pointed this out, you'll find that the minimum distance during the transitions can actually get down to your normal spacing for your formations divided by square root of 2. So that 2.1, that's pretty average to see on a transition. So now the circle's up. That's great. Now we want to move it over to the show area. So this is the how you do animations. For the start of your animation, to move it, we're going to move it to the start of the circle. We're going to select our circle. I'll actually just turn off the drones. By the way, these visibilities over here, you'll be using that a lot, especially as you get a lot of objects in there. So to turn the drones off and just be looking at our circle and avoid accidentally selecting a drone, we just make that invisible for now. Select the circle. Now you're going to add a keyframe. So to add a keyframe, it's the I key. And then we can add a keyframe for just location, just rotation, just for scale, and any combinations of those. So we're not going to rotate the circle just yet, so let's just make the location rotatable. Actually, let's see if we can rotate this circle around. Let me undo that. And I'm going to actually keyframe the location and the rotation. And then we just go to the end of our formation here. You can change it at any time. Let's look at a top-down view and hit the G key with our object selected to move it over to the show area. Oops. Nope. I want to be straight top-down, so I just get XY movement here in the show area, and I'm going to now hit I for location rotation, and you'll see that if I turn the drones back on, that as the show is running here, selected play, the drones are now moving from the initial takeoff circle over here. Now you'll notice it's moving really slowly at first, and then it's going to speed up, and then it's going to slow down. The reason for that is because by default the motion in Blender, it smooths it on a Bezier curve. And if anybody knows a quicker way to do this, let me know. But the fix for that is to go into the graph editor. You can either make things linear, in which case it's just a constant motion by going to your key, and on the interpolation mode just change it to linear. But I do like to leave a little bit of smoothing on there, and so kind of have to play around with these this view till it gets easy to scale it like I'm doing, but it is possible to learn that. Oops, I went the wrong way. What I'm trying to do is make that expand out a lot so I can see the. Oops, I did too much that time. I'm clearly out of practice on this. There we go. Okay, so now you can see pretty much the full range of the interpolation smoothing for the X and for the Y motion. I think the X is red and the Y is green. If you ever forget, you can expand this out and you can see the color coding for X, Y location. It'll also smooth rotations when you do those. So in order to reduce the amount of smoothing here that causes all that acceleration, select the curve that you want first, select the handle, and I hit the G and the X just to make sure I'm moving it purely in the X direction. By the way, you can really mess this up if you start moving it in an up and down direction. I'm going to go ahead and do that, move it on the back end as well. See, that's what you don't want to do. I forgot to hit X. G and then X. Okay, and then I'm going to go and I'm going to do this on the Y. You don't have to do this, but it will just make things more efficient time-wise and get there quicker with at least with some smoothing. And this is pretty normal here, where you'll get the safety warnings while you're making modifications. As soon as we come back, those safety warnings are going to go away. And this is going to actually reduce the maximum speed. It reduced it down about 1 meter per second. So what that means actually is I can take this end keyframe for the motion, and I can actually move it so that this formation moves faster. So when I do that, I just go back to the middle where it's going to move the fastest, and I can see now 3.2 is the max. So I can actually take this duration of this first formation and reduce this down. I'm just doing this by trial and error, updating the time markers. And I've now reduced this formation down pretty much to a reasonable time to go ahead and go on out there. Now I did add a keyframe here for rotation, so let's see what happens if we go back to the end keyframe. To find it exactly, I'm going to select on item over here, and then put my mouse over the timeline. I'm going to arrow until I see it turn, I guess that's an orange color. So that's where the keyframe actually got added. And now I'm going to rotate this formation, R, around the y-axis. And let's rotate it, let's see if 270 degrees will work. Now let's keyframe not just the location, but the location and the rotation. And we will see that as this rotation is moving out, not only is it moving, but it's also rotating. Now you'll see these velocity warnings. That's because 270 degrees was way too much to rotate it. So let's go ahead and change that. So come back here. There was my rotation of 270 degrees. Let's just change that to 180 degrees, and we'll re-keyframe it. And now let's see what's going on with our velocities. They're still up at 5.1. So what's going on is the formation is rotating while it's also moving, which is speeding up these drones here on the bottom. So I won't play around with this for too long, but we'll just change it to 90 so we get a little bit something more than a straight motion. And now we'll probably, still too much. So what we can do is we can just, easy enough, just go ahead and move this keyframe so it includes both the rotation and the movement. And yeah, there's 3.2 right there. By the way, we could have done the same thing smoothing on the rotation. So in either case, we're back to, on formations, we're back to this this formation being about probably, let's see if 850 works on the time. Yeah, that's pretty good. So we're now at 850 on the timing. So we've now got the drones in the basically in the takeoff area. I'll show you now how to set the camera to essentially look at your formation. So let's go ahead and select the camera. We're going to select item to see where in the world this camera even is, and it's back 19 meters on the y-axis. See it anywhere. Let's see, is it hidden? No. Let's bring it up above the scene. Oh, there it is. Okay, so it's just not very far back. Let's say that we would have the spectators about maybe 100 meters back from the, there we go. And actually what we can do is we can go to the top-down view, and we can actually take this camera here and we can actually move it to home plate. That'd be pretty close to where the spectators are. Maybe just even move it back to where the spectators are there. That's great. And to see what the camera is seeing, we are going to select this camera here, and it's looking kind of straight down and to the left, it looks. So for the rotation, on the Z rotation, let's move that to where we're looking essentially straight. And then in the X rotation, let's look to where we're looking actually up. And we don't see anything just yet. This is a common thing. I think I know what it is. Because in our camera properties here, our view ends at 100 meters. So if you just change that to a really high value, say 250 meters, now all of a sudden your drones will come into view. That camera was cutting off right at 100 meters. So it looks like I've got the view a little bit to the right of center, so I'm just going to change the X location over until I'm looking right down it, and I'm looking at there. So boom, that's a really nice view now from the audience looking at the camera. And if I change it to this view right here, it's looking good. Another thing I like to do as well is in the render on the bloom settings is change this intensity up to 3 or even 3.5 if you want to. And I don't know if you saw, but that gives the drones a nice glow to them as well. If you want to see what what it's really looking like, you could really would want to turn off the circle there, and boom, there it is. It's beautiful. So let's go ahead and move into actually creating something different now. And let's create, what should we do? Let's create actually two circles. Let's have this expand out into 2 circles instead of 1. So let's turn the drones off, let's go ahead and select on the starts collection. So as we're adding things, it adds them into this collection. I'm going to turn the circle back on just to see where the drones previously were. And then I'm going to set the origin of this. Well, the origin of this circle is right in the center, but what I'm going to do now is a trick that you'll find increasingly useful as you get more into this, is I'm going to move the 3D cursor to the center of this circle. So right now it's at the origin, XYZ. And so what happens when you hit Shift A and you add new objects, it adds them where the 3D cursor is located by default. So if I do Shift S, I'm going to get an option to move the cursor to the selected formation, so that now when I add new objects, they actually get added here. Remember, I translated all the way over here, so I don't want things added over here. I want them added where the drones already are. So I'm going to do Shift A, and I'm going to add another circle. But this time we're going to do 2 circles, so we'll do half the vertices, 15. That means we'll need only half the radius. But we still got to rotate this up 90 degrees, and then let's move this over to the left. So I'm going to do G, X, move it to the side of the circle there, and I'm going to duplicate this circle. I'm going to do Shift D, and then I'm going to move that new one over to the side. Cool. Okay, so I got circle.001 and .002. So let's make a new collection within this collection, and let's call this new collection circle pair. That'll work. And we can move circle 1 up into it. We can move circle 2 up into it. And we got them there. And we want to rotate these. We want to do something with these circles that's interesting. And so what I'm going to show you here is how to use axes to do your rotations so they work out. If you don't use axes, the rotation on that first circle, it worked out because it is a circle. But when you do the rotations on more complex objects and rotations about other objects, it takes a little bit more. And adding an empty axis or just any object that it can rotate around pretty much is the key to that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add an empty axis to this left circle over here. I think we can turn off the middle circle. So now this is just going to be our new formation. And I think we probably want these closer together. I think it'll look cooler if they're closer together. So I'm going to do that now. I'm just going to move them about the x-axis and just kind of do this visually here. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to move the 3D cursor to the middle of the circle so that when I do Shift A and I add an empty axis, it gets added right there. So right away I'm going to change the name of this axis to Circle 1 axis. I don't know, name it whatever you want. And then I'm going to add one here. I'm going to move the cursor to the middle. I'm going to add another empty axis. Call this Circle 2 axis. And now I'm going to do the trick, which is to parent to the axes. So you select the object first, hold down the Shift key, and then select the axis, and then right-click and parent. That is a huge key that took me forever to learn. Another way, if you're having trouble selecting them, you can come up here and select, in this case I want to select Circle 2 and the Circle 2 axis. I can hold down the Control key and get it that way, but you have to come over here and actually do the parenting. So now all I'm going to do to rotate this, for example, this circle right here, if I zoom in on it, you'll be able to see it. All I have to do to rotate that circle is to rotate this axis right here. Now, a really nice advantage of what I did here is I can also copy the rotation of this axis. See how that works too. I can copy the rotation of these axes to each other. So for this axis right here, I'm going to add a constraint. That constraint is going to be a copy rotation. It's going to target the Circle 1 axis rotation, and we're going to rotate it just on the y-axis. But actually, let's invert it. Let's do it so they'll actually rotate in, I think, in reverse of each other. Let's test that and see if it works. R, Y, and sure enough, they're rotating inverse of each other. So we can go ahead and test that now and just kind of see how that looks. This would be a good time to set up the group assignments. So this is going to be a little bit more complex because I've now got two objects that I have group assignments for. So I'm going to select the first object. I'm going to go into Tab so that I got the vertices selected. You have to have the vertices selected before you do the step of adding the vertex groups. I guess that kind of makes sense. Don't forget to click Assign and use Selected. And now I've got to go back into the object mode by hitting Tab, and so that I can select the other object, and then I tab back into the vertices, make sure those are all selected, plus Assign, use Selected, go back into Tab mode. Now when I add this formation, I need to select both of the objects. So I should have two objects selected over here. I've got two. I'm going to go into Formations and add this formation. It may, even if I select that before I do it, whoops, did not. I was going to say it may actually give us the circle pair, but it didn't. So I can give this formation named circle pair, selected objects, it's the two. Okay, append, I've got my circle pair added. Update time markers, a lot less time to transition to this formation for sure. And recalculate transitions. And now when I turn the drones on, ooh, we can already see that's a cool transition. We can now see that that circle collapses now into our pair of two circles. So that's awesome. So now what we can do is we can take this axis and keyframe its rotation, come over to the end of the formation. We could rotate it 180 degrees, and we could keyframe that rotation. And now what's going to happen is not only do these the vertices in this circle rotate, but the vertices in the other one rotate in the opposite direction. All right, so that's pretty cool. Now let's get really crazy, and I'll show you how to rotate these objects around each other. So what we can do is we can select this, we can select the whole thing and do Shift S and put the cursor to selected, and that's going to put the 3D cursor actually just directly between there so that I can add a new empty axis. I'm going to call this just middle axis, I guess. And now what I can do is I can actually parent these two axes to this axis. The reason parenting works to this axis is because I selected it last. Yeah, and that's done. So now I wonder what happens if I take this axis here and I add a rotation keyframe on this axis. I go to the end here and I'm going to rotate this axis around the Z. Insert a keyframe for that. And looky there. Not only are the axes rotating around each other like we initially did, but now we got the circles rotating around each other too. We got some weird things going on with the speed, and again, what you can do there is just kind of slow the whole thing down. So I'm going to take this circle pair. I'm going to select all the objects that are in it. Now I'm going to see all the keyframes. I got a couple of the keyframes that are not quite the same, but I'm just going to select them all down here in the timeline. No, not all of them. I'm going to select the right ones and just move those back a little bit. So now when we look at the rotation, we don't get any speeds that are exceeded. You can definitely play with the graph editor there and smooth out some of that Bezier curve so that it takes less time. It's basically just like that. Like that, and that's going to get things just in a little bit more uniform motion, so there's not so much acceleration in the middle. But I guess I said I wasn't going to do that in the interest of time, but I just did it, so it's done. And so now we see our max speed is only 2.3, so could go ahead and take this and actually move it back a little bit. Come in the middle here, max speed is 3, and do even a little bit more. Now my max speed is 3.5. I think I like that. And so I really only have to increase the length of this formation just a little bit there. Okay, great. So now we got the circle coming up, rotating over, transitions into 2 circles, and they rotate nicely around each other. So that is it. That's a lot. That's a lot to do with axes and whatnot. By the way, I like to rotate my formations or tilt them forward. If you'll see right now, the primary viewing angle for this is straight off to the left. What you'd probably rather do is you'd probably have it angled down a little bit. So we can take just the middle axis only. I think that's the only thing that's selected right now. You can actually hit R and rotate that along the x-axis. 15 degrees or something like that. That didn't quite work out. So how about if we rotate it on the local axis, 15 degrees. Yeah, okay. It takes a little bit more thought of, you have to understand when you do rotations, this Euler angle here, and I'm not going to take the time to play around with it, but it would take a couple of minutes of fiddling around with the right selection here and rotating on local versus world axes to do that. But just want to point out when you use the axes and parenting like this, it becomes very easy then to get your formations tilted down to the angle that you want for the audience. Okay, the next thing I'd like to show you, which will really add some motion to your shows, is how to animate. I think it's a common question too. How do I animate along a curve? And so how we're going to do that is we're going to add a curve first. So let's go ahead and hide the drones. Put the cursor, the 3D cursor in the middle there. That's good. So let's go ahead and hide the circle pair now. And we're going to add like a helix, I think is what we'll add. So because I had the extra objects, curve objects, I've now got an option for Archimedean curve. So that's kind of a neat one. I'm going to go ahead and take advantage of the fact that this screen allows us to change the number of turns right here. It allows us to change the height of the helix. It allows us to change the radius. And so let's just get this to something that looks reasonable and fun. Let's go ahead and center the location. Actually, it is really nicely centered already. So I'm just going to go with that. Because when you added this curve, it went into edit mode. I'm going to now go back to the object mode. I'm going to now add my mesh object that's we're going to animate along this curve. So it's important that your object and the curve that you're going to animate on have the same center. And so the center for this is right there. So let's go ahead and do a Shift S and get the cursor right there to the center of the helix. So that now when we add this vertex, it's gonna adopt that same center. So I'm going to add a mesh object, and I'm going to add a single vertex. Oh, that seems weird. So I'm going to show you a very easy way to create a string of 30 drones. So that's going to be to do Shift D. I'm going to hit X to move that new vertex that I just duplicated in the X direction 3 meters, since that's my standard spacing. And I'm going to left click, and I now just added my second vertex. Now all I have to do is Shift R, which is just to repeat. And I'm just going to keep repeating it until I get 30 vertices. So I now have, like really quickly there, I've got my object that I'm going to animate along this curve. So all I really have to do at this point is go back to the object mode and add a modifier that's going to be on the curve. Oh, and I wasn't very careful about the naming here, so let's do that again. Let's add a new thing, and let's call this call it a helix. It's probably not the right name, but and I like to do this. It just becomes important. I typically get about 14 to 18 formations in a show, so when you start to get there, it's nice to have these kind of compartmentalized instead of having a huge long list. But let's go ahead and select this vertex now and add the curve modifier, and it's the spiral is just the name that we gave it, and boom, it's right now up and attached onto that helix, so that when I hit G to move it, if I want to move it left and right, it's not going to move left and right x-axis normally. It's going to actually just animate along this curve. And what happens on animations, on the curve modifier, is that your object's just going to spit out in the same direction as the last part of the curve. So let's just leave that right there. Let us make this a new formation. So I'm going to go into the edit mode, and I'm going to now group these. Now notice these did not get selected, so they do have to be selected. I've got 30 of them selected now. Go to the object data properties and add that group, assign it, use selected, go back to object mode, formations, select the object, that's the curve, so I got to have the object, the mesh curve selected. Add, let's call this helix. And append that to the storyboard. So now if we go down and look at our storyboard, we update the time markers, we have now got at the helix. So we turn on the drones and we watch that through. Whoops, I didn't compute the transitions. So let's go ahead and recalculate the transition. This time it's just to the selected formation to the helix. Save a little bit of time. And boom, you can now see the transition from the circle pair up to the helix. Now let's animate it. Got this vertex selected. I'm going to be animating the X location. So let's just keyframe the location. Go to the end here. Move it up. Keyframe it. Play it. And now we've got this nice following of the curve on up the rotation. Those speeds actually looked, yeah, those looked pretty good. Awesome. Okay, so I think I'm going to end this tutorial right here. Before I do, I just wanted to show you a kind of a technique that I use, and I think maybe I'll get some help on make it into a GitHub repository or something. But how I do, you might have caught it when I first had up, how I do my lights is I like the LED options right here, but on the transitions I found that I get a lot smoother effects by using Python scripting. And so the Python script I'm using, it's not super awesome, but I've got, for example, a stars on a transition. If I've got a transition here, and that starts at frame, say 2200, I'll take 2200, say this formation ends at 2350, I'm sorry, the transition ends at 2350. So just within this frame, I'm taking my colors palette, which is just a rainbow, bunch of rainbow shades. I get a 50% flash rate, I get a 12-second duration of the flash, and a 6-second ramp up and ramp down of the effect, so that if I then select all the drones, I've got to deselect the helix, so that when I select all drones, I should have 30 objects selected. I do, and I run the script. Now I get just a whole bunch of keyframes in there. So if I go to the pretty view, turn off grid, floor and the X and the Y and the Z. And let's even go and look at it and see it how the audience might see it in this view here. Now when I play this transition, I'm going to get all those colors. Oh, there's one thing I forgot to do, which is that before I do that, I'm always fading the colors to black. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's apply a black right here. My fade out, I'm almost always doing this. I just don't like the really quick colors. I like them to be kind of smooth. So I'll normally take the initial color or the black, and I'll just separate those by, I don't know, about a second or something. So then you get this really nice smooth down effect on the colors. But because I applied the transition before I did that, it didn't work. So this is where having 150 steps of undo is awesome. So let's do that again. Let's do 30. Let's apply the black. We'll get a nice good fade on the colors here. Got all of them selected. And see how quick this is to go ahead and apply that coloring effect. So now they fade down. And get this nice color effect. So I hope that this was helpful in terms of getting you just up and started with basic stuff in Blender to start adding things to your show. We covered how to add actually we covered how to enable add-ons, and then also how to add objects, curves, and objects. We went in and out of object and edit mode, which is super duper important. How to pair the vertices to the drone so they actually work when you go and you add it to the formation. And then the really important thing to start learning as you get into more complex designs is the parenting and rotation about the axes. So I hope this was helpful, and would appreciate any feedback for things that you all want to learn how to do in the future. All right, thanks very much.